Okay, now that you've seen how to use Excel to make your data tables, let's carry on and show how we can use Excel to make some graphs. I've filled out the rest of the data that would correspond to this example for the free fall lab. And again, let's go into a print preview and just take a look. Everything looks pretty good here. For the sake of making it clear in this presentation, I'm going to increase the font size. Hopefully that's a little easier for you to read. Okay, so we want to make graphs of both height versus time and height versus time squared. I'll just show you the height versus time squared one for now, and you can apply the same set of rules for the height versus time. So I've gone ahead and renamed this sheet data. Now I want to add a couple new sheets. So let's rename this one. If I right click with my mouse on the sheet and it pulls up, it makes a pop-up window show up. Hit rename and we'll call this H versus T. So we'll use that for the graph for height versus time. And we'll add another sheet and rename that height versus time squared. Okay, let's go back to the sheet that has the data. Now if I just click on a column, it highlights the whole column. Same thing with a row. If I click in this very corner, it highlights the whole sheet. So I'm going to do that and hit Control-C. And I'll go into my sheet for height versus time squared. And again, click on the whole sheet and hit Control-V. And now I've pasted a copy of that data table onto this sheet for the graph. Okay, the reason I want to do that is I want to put the two columns right next to each other that I'm graphing. So I'm going to take the actual height and I'm going to drag it right here next to the column for time squared. And now that these two sets of data sit side by side, I can highlight the two of them. And at this point I want to insert a graph. Excel doesn't call it graph, it calls it chart. So let's go up top. And we've got File, Home, Insert. Well, that's where we want to go. Insert, and we want to choose Chart. Okay, so we can expand and pull up this window and it gives some recommended style of charts. So we can click on all the charts and choose between a line graph or a pie graph or so on. Okay, what we want is XY scatter. Now the other way to do this with the columns highlighted is there's a few types of charts as well just displayed. So this is the one for scatter. If we click on that one, then we have a few different types of scatter plots. Notice this one, how the trend line isn't very straight, even though the theory of this lab says it should be. So what it's trying to do is hit every data point exactly, and it's also not showing the data points. So it's a pretty crummy graph. Let's delete that one and try again. Let's go back to Insert and go back to our scatter options. And how about we choose the one that just puts the data points down. Okay, there we have it. We can expand this. Doesn't matter if it overlaps with our data set. That's fine. So if we want to include the trend line, all we need to do is right click on any one of our data points and some options show up. We can add a trend line. The default is to make it linear, which in this case works out fine. You can see that a polynomial or logarithmic or moving average are other options, but we definitely want linear. We also want to set the intercept in this case. I know that 0, 0 is a valid data point. It should take 0 seconds for a marble to fall 0 centimeters. So I'm going to click on Set the Intercept. Now, in some other labs, there may be a theory that says we have a positive or negative value for a y-intercept, so we might want to set that. But in this case, we know we want it to be 0. So that's all good. Let's go back into the chart title. And if we double click, we can call this height versus time squared. Okay, so we're getting there. I'm not real happy with this trend line. Let's right click on it again. If we go into the line options, then we can change it from a dashed line to a solid line. We can change the weight of that line and make it thicker. Of course, if it's too thick, it starts to obscure the data points. So often a thinner line is going to appear better. Okay, hey, and notice that the trend line doesn't exactly go through the middle of every data point. The data points have error, and so I would not expect my trend line to hit every data point exactly. This lab didn't have a whole lot of error, so it comes really close, but you can see that data point is slightly below the line. This data point is, well, it's kind of on it, but it's not centered on it. It's a little bit above the line. So this looks like a pretty good one. We're just missing one thing. We've got the numerical values on our axes, and we've got the title, but we're not stating once again what quantity is on the y-axis and what units are being used. So we can go back to insert, and we can insert a text box. If we click here, we can insert H to stand for height and state that the height was measured in units of centimeters. So if we drag that over here, now we've done a better job of labeling our axes. We can do the same thing here. Insert, choose text box. In this case, the x-axis isn't just time, it's time squared. So we're going to say T2. I'm going to highlight that 2 and use the superscript. So now it says time squared. And we also need to state what the units are. Click again on this text box. Well, it's maintaining that superscript, so let's uncheck that and enter second squared, and again we need to make that 2 a superscript. Okay, so we're really making our work very presentable. And there we go. Now we can go into File and do a print preview for this as well. Incorrectly formatted, it's trying to print it in landscape orientation. We always want our graphs in portrait orientation. Perhaps a better option would be to highlight our whole graph and use the Control-C copy function. And we'll open up a Microsoft Word document, choose blank document, and now that we've copied the chart, we can use the Control-V function to paste it. Take a look at this print preview. Okay, that looks nice. And now if we need to, we can add any statements we want. So we can say the slope of this graph, or we can add a conclusion, you name it. All right, let's go back into Excel and then see if we can go through this one more time really quickly. So now I want to make the graph of height versus time. So what do? Go back to the data, make sure I've highlighted the whole sheet, Control-C copies, go to the new sheet we want to fill out, Control-V will paste it, and this time I want it to be height versus time, so I'm going to take this column, highlight it, grab its edge and drag it out of the way, take the column for actual height, grab its edge, and put it right next to the column for time. If I highlight the columns for time and actual height and go to insert, I can now insert my scatter chart, expand it, and again I'm going to want to rename it by clicking in the chart title, and let's take a look at trend line in this case. If I right click on any data point and add a trend line, notice the default is to try to make it linear, whereas in this case a linear fit absolutely doesn't work, right? Height is proportional to time squared, so we would expect to get a polynomial of order 2. So if we right click on polynomial, or we click polynomial and go over to the right, we can click order 2, order 3, and so on. Now we also want to again set the intercept to 0. So notice this graph is displaying some negative values on the y-axis. If we click set intercept to 0, suddenly all those negative values go away. So I'd want to do the same thing here by inserting some text boxes and labeling the quantities on both the x and y axis and changing my chart title, but you get the idea from here. So there you have it. This is how we use Excel to overcome some of the defaults and make an appropriate graph.